Thank you for everyone who's attending today. So I do leave a pretty good amount of time at the end for any of your specific questions, because I realize, like, as much as a lot of artists do have kind of similar issues in common, we can't cover everything. I know I couldn't cover every single little thing in this presentation. So I do want to make it's actually pretty good. We have a group of this size who I hope you all could feel comfortable enough to talk about whatever comes to your mind, whether it's a problem or just something that resonates with you that you'd like to share with others. This could be a really beneficial time to do that. So I've titled the presentation Stress Management for Performing Artists, mostly because there is really no way to kind of like sum up all of the different types of pressures and expectations that are put on artists, which don't always feel stressful. So I think there's a lot of expectations for us to manage that's oftentimes can feel stressful, but other times can really invigorate and revitalize us. Like the expectation that there's this group of people, like my audience, that is here, they've paid money to watch me. It can be a very beautiful thing. It's like an enlivening thing, as much as it could be a stressful thing and anxiety provoking for a lot of people. So I want to put that into perspective that, being an artist, there's so many sides of it that it can bring out this like sort of conflict within like everything we do, where we want to be seen. And I think that's a really deep emotional need for all people. We want to be seen by others. And we all have our reasons that we don't want to be seen, because being seen comes with its own pain sometimes, or its own anxieties. Being seen can mean, what if I'm seen by the wrong people? What if I'm seen by people who don't know how to interpret who I am, or kind of see me in a way that I don't see myself? There's some inconsistencies there. So really, I think a lot of the common issues, common mental health concerns for performing artists. So I'll go over kind of categorically what they are. But I also think it deeply comes down to our own relationship with intimacy, our own earliest life relationships, and really how we have learned to see and be seen or not be seen, that conflict between wanting to be adored by others, to be noticed, to have, affection put our way. And also, please don't give me that because it's scary. So, our own relationship with those sort of needs in ourselves do manifest in how we perform and how we create our art. So understanding our needs in relationships and our blocks in relationships are going to tell you a lot about your relationship with your own art. And so that manifests in, so that deeper kind of like core issue can manifest in so many different ways. So we do have I do want to mention there are some situational stressors that we're all kind of facing. Those are what we call adjustment concerns or situational stressors. So it's only because we're all in this COVID pandemic, for example, it's called an adjustment concern. But then sometimes we have other longer standing or more kind of like big kind of concerns that might be with us over time. Creative blocks, problems with procrastination. As much as you have studied all of these like organizational time management books, there's some part of you that's like, I cannot stop procrastinating. I don't know why. Difficulty finishing projects. So maybe you start it and once you get to a certain point, you freeze up. You can't finish it. Imposter syndrome, feeling like I don't really deserve what I have, even though I know I've worked very hard for it. There can be a lot of difficulties with working with the team, performance anxiety, and then of course the whole kind of atmosphere of competitiveness, which we'll talk more about later, having to deal with rejection as often as you might have to. So, somebody who is like applying to medical school, they have to deal with rejection when they apply to medical school. They have to deal with rejection when they apply for residency or apply for jobs, but that's pretty much, those are the main times you're getting rejected. Otherwise, you're kind of just learning and doing your job on a daily basis. Whereas artists, constantly you're like putting yourself out there and have to deal with being, the abandonment fears that might come up, or rejection, or just people not wanting to see you. So it's very stressful and different from many other professions. That level of competitiveness that there could be. Some people struggle with perfectionism and being overcritical of themselves. And as much as we want to be the best that we can be, some people take it to a place where it actually interferes with their daily functioning. And then, of course, body image issues. So if you're visually kind of like put on display a lot, of course, that makes you pay more attention to your body. I just spoke to a patient today who is a dancer, and she was like, I realized that I spend most of my day in front of a mirror. And she was reflecting on what that does to her. But it's not only dancers, I think musicians also, as much as you can kind of not, not everyone knows what you look like when you're performing music. To a certain extent, you feel you have to present yourself in a certain way when you're performing. Again, it's not something that everyone has to think about in the same way who's not an artist. So, as I said, a lot of these things are kind of a normal part of an artist's life. But if you have an increased level of these stressors over time, it can manifest in ways that look like sort of mental dysfunction. So as much as you can be used to the competitive atmosphere, if it's a little more stressful or if it's affecting you particularly over time, what that could look like is lack of concentration. It's difficulty to focus on what I'm doing. You feel very worried about the future. There are things you usually enjoy in your life that you're neglecting, or it's hard to enjoy them. Any change to sleep or appetite, I tell people to take note of. That's usually a sign that something's kind of going wrong. And any increase in your usual symptoms. So you might be somebody who maybe you tend a little more towards anxiety, and that you have some acceptance for it. But if it's more than usual, that's probably a sign that stress is increasing. And also if your older triggers or cues resurface. So things that maybe were a trigger for you in middle school, now all of a sudden you're like 33 and it's coming back, it's a sign that something might be going wrong. So also chronic stress, as much as some of us don't really feel it emotionally, it does have an effect on the body, especially for people, research shows people from Asian backgrounds, especially, but as well as people who are Latinx, and to a certain extent, research shows people who are African American tend to manifest mental illness somatically, so in the body. So they might not necessarily feel sad or might not be crying, but they'll have this sort of mysterious pain in the body or a fever that comes and goes. So chronic stress can be expressed purely through physical symptoms, but also it causes, certain stress on the body that can lead to long-term immune disorders, problems with your hormonal functioning. So we see a lot of people with PCOS nowadays, and difficulties in thyroid functioning, autoimmune disorders, really young people getting rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune condition, difficulties in adrenal functioning. And all of this it's the result of stress. It's the result of chronic stress or repressed trauma. They have very similar effects. Like repressed trauma and chronic stress pretty much have similar effects on the body over time. So why are some of these effects worsen for artists? Well, because you are in this atmosphere of constant evaluation and comparison, and that does have an effect on you. Me as a psychologist, I am also an artist. I didn't mention that. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. I'm also a Kathak dancer. It's a type of Indian classical dance, and I'm a poet and a writer as well. And I also am a painter, but I have not painted in a long time. So, yeah, in my life as a psychologist, though, not the artist part, I pretty much am just alone in my office all day, except for my patients. I never meet anyone. I see my colleagues like maybe once a day for 45 minutes, and then that's it. And it's a nice lonely life for me. But there's no comparison. I'm not meeting my colleagues and being like, oh yeah, they said something much better to their depressed client than I did. There's none of that. There's no comparison. However, in the life of an artist, there is literally always comparison. You're like, when you present your work, you're comparing it to people who came before you, to people who are your peers. And in a way, it's a good thing. You do want to be able to make sure that you're being politically correct, for example, or that you're bringing something new to a piece that wasn't said before, and that's nice. But in other ways, it can be so outwardly focused. There's so much awareness of other people that you lack awareness of the self, or so self-focused that you lack awareness of others. So we want to have a balance there and self-other awareness, and it can be hard to cultivate in the artistic environment. There can be a culture of criticism instead of constructive feedback. And I really think it has to do with kind of your teachers, and it's different for different people. I worked with a she wasn't a ballerina anymore, but a woman who was a former ballerina, and she trained with a Russian ballerina who moved to the United States. And like the impact of this woman's constant criticism, like this patient told me every single time I went to the dance studio, I would have to weigh myself. And if I was even like half a pound heavier, which could just be water weight, half a pound heavier, I would get like berated by this woman. And then with my tear-filled eyes have to go into the dance studio and dance and be perfect. Like, how could that not have an effect on you over time? Of course, you know, she realized it had an effect on her, but again, there is no other profession. Like a doctor does not experience that. A lawyer does not experience that, or at least in the same way. So there could be this culture of criticism that becomes a part of like how art forms are taught and how they continue on, even if you're not learning anymore. Certain, you know, companies can be like that. And it follows you. And a lot of the time it's taught to you as if this is the only way that it can be done. This is the only way you can become a good ballerina if you do it this way. Versus there are people who are able to deliver feedback in a way that feels compassionate, and also is sort of, it's understood that feedback is subjective. So how do you feel you did with this piece? What do you think you could have improved? What I liked about the piece, what I would love to see more about is if you did this. What I wonder about why you included it is this part. You know, there's a way to deliver it that allows people to have more self-reflection versus this is wrong and this is right. Some people, depending on their training, have had a very rigid or restrictive lifestyle from a very young age. So this is not everyone, but some people have been raised in households where being a particular type of artist is a part of the family values. So, you know, everyone in our family learned violin or is a classical musician. And so this is something you have to do. Or, you know, my mom was a ballerina, and so I have to be one too, something like that. And there could be a very restrictive lifestyle built around the arts in that way. It can feel much less joyous and more like this is a thing I have to do because I'm good at it. And you know, I hear a lot of young people say, well, I wasn't allowed to have friends outside of my music classes. I'm not allowed to see people. As soon as I come home, I do my homework and then I practice and that's it. And those kinds of things can follow you through life and cause some real detriment to your social ability. Of course, you know, the usual kind of issues of difficulty balancing your income and stability with enjoying the arts. So we want to be able to pursue things that give us meaning and allow us to live our life in a stable way. And sometimes it can feel like it's at the detriment of enjoying life. So the conflict between, you know, pleasure and purpose, which don't have to be in conflict, but it could feel like a conflict. You know, being valued for what you do and not who you are is another thing. So there's a lot of artists that I see, like, put themselves out there and, you know, they realize that they're valued for the way they look or the way they perform, and their whole self becomes constructed around what they create and contribute to the world. And there's less a sense of, well, I can also be appreciated whether or not I've made a song and shared it on Instagram this week. Imagine that. You know, there's like difficulty in understanding that people can love, appreciate, and see me whether or not I'm creating right now. And then lastly, you know, what can be really difficult is an underdevelopment of these other parts of yourself. So a lot of your focus can be on creating, and a lot of focus is on pursuing your artistic pursuits, but you don't work on your relationships. You have, you know, this chronic feeling of loneliness, and yet you do nothing to kind of explore that. Or your friendships all seem to fall apart, but you don't really seem to think about it. So focusing on any part of yourself to the detriment of other parts is not good. As much as art, you know, it's a beautiful thing, and our work is a beautiful thing, and it's like so much a part of us, it's only one part of us. So what can be difficult for artists is to not kind of like only focus on that, but to know that, no, there's other parts of me that are important too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about things you can do to cope, but they're not all applicable to everyone. I just want to give you, I know this, a lot of you are young people who might not necessarily have learned too many coping skills growing up. But I do want to say, like, a lot of what you can do to cope has to do with understanding your story. So understanding like who you are and what has made you the person you are. Therapy helps you with that. Storytelling helps you with that. Some people share it through their art, others don't. But at the core of it is understanding your feelings and being in touch with them. So I know it seems counterintuitive for me to tell a bunch of artists you to be in touch with your feelings, but sometimes we're only in touch with the feelings that make us produce good art and not the other ones. Or we're only in touch with the feelings that are associated with the film we're trying to create, but not others. So we got to be in touch with all of them, even the ones that are scary or are filled with shame or guilt, because they're all a part of us. Okay, so when you're in a stressful situation, when you're in a place where you feel like your mind is in a negative place, when you're overcome with anxiety, so these are some things that are called thinking traps. And these are places our mind tends to go when we're very depressed or anxious. So if we can start to identify them, we'll notice them in the moment when they come up, and we can try to find another way to think. So I'm going to go, these 5 are very common, but if you Googled it, you'd come up with a list of like 10, 15, or 15. So like, I don't think we all need to know every single one of them, but I think these 5 will give you a clue for what to start to look out for. So the first is called fortune telling. And that's when we think we know how something's going to turn out before it happens. It's something we do a lot. So, oh, I know if I do this, I'm going to fail. I'm never able to do this thing. The second one is black and white thinking. So I either have to do it this way or I have to do it this way. And if I don't, nothing's going to work out for me. Or I can choose to pursue my acting career, or I can have a stable life. And we create these black and white situations for us when usually it could be, I can be an artist and I can have a stable life. Mind reading is when we attempt to believe, or like we think we know what other people think about us. So, oh my God, everyone must think this is so stupid. This is like the worst idea. People must think I'm so like gross looking or something like that. So we think we know what other people think. The fourth one is overgeneralization. So that's when we use words like always or never to describe situations or and events, when in real life, usually things are much more nuanced than that. So I always make a mistake on this piece. I'll never be good at this piece. I'll never be good at performing this. When in reality, there are times when we are good, there are times when we're bad, there are times we face challenges and other times we don't. I'm going to go more into kind of how to combat these, but I want to kind of focus on identifying them. And the fifth would be labeling. So this is when, generally, it's when we talk to ourselves in mean ways. You notice the voice that you're speaking to yourself with is really unhelpful and unfair. And I want to kind of highlight the unhelpful part. Because I was talking to a client one day who she was like, she's an actress. And she was saying, whenever, you tell me to think about my fantasies, about my dream career, or think about where I really want to be in life, there's a part of me that she said, it's like I slap myself on the wrist and I tell myself, you can't think that, because part of me wants to be pragmatic. Part of me wants to make sure I'm thinking of things realistically and rationally. And I think a lot of the time we conflate the two things. We think that being rational is the same thing as helpful, and rational is the same thing as smart, when really they're not the same thing. Telling ourselves that I have to do things in this specific way because it's worked out for other people, so it has to work for me. And if I let myself pursue my dreams, then I'm going to fail. Like, that's not really realistic. In real life is much more nuanced than that. And it's not helpful to be mean to yourself. What's helpful is to be able to listen to your feelings, to be aware of all of your fears and anxieties, and to take a step in the direction that really calls to you once you've kind of seen all sides of how you're thinking about something. That's realistic. But to tell yourself a story like, well, if I, get my MFA, I'll never be successful the way I would have been if I had gone to engineering school. There's plenty of engineers who, have been unemployed for years because like engineering is not such a difficult, easy field to stay in. There's plenty of people who have not gotten an MFA and have gotten into, amazing kind of arts careers. There's just so many ways to be a human. And when we tell ourselves that, like, the way you're thinking about your life is stupid or it won't work out, and you have no evidence for it, does more hurt than good. So let's think about how we confront these thinking traps. So now that you have an idea of how to identify them, what happens when I've noticed I'm overgeneralizing or I'm fortune telling. Now what? So ask yourself to, try to separate your thoughts from what has actually happened. So what is the situation? And in facts, in terms of just like labeling things objectively, what happened? Okay, well, what happened to me was that I didn't get into the Yale MFA program. What are my thoughts that I'm telling myself? Thoughts are, I'm so stupid, I shouldn't have even applied, why did I even try? Those are my thoughts. My emotions that I'm feeling are, I'm feeling very sad. I'm feeling pretty angry. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling disappointed. And then what are my behaviors? How am I acting or reacting? And what am I doing to cope? So what I might be doing, I might not be coping. I might be really struggling out here. I'm reacting maybe by shutting other people out. I am deciding to maybe I'm using substances more or something like that. There's so many different ways that you could be coping. So the important part about these steps, separating your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, is because it allows us to have a little bit more control over the situation. Otherwise, it feels very overwhelming. So you open that email, it says, I'm sorry you did not get into the Yale MFA program. You're assaulted by your own emotions, your thoughts. Oh, I'm not good enough. And you're like, oh, nothing in life is ever going to work out again. And it all feels like a very tangled mess. So in the first step, when you can start to just kind of bring everything into its own thread, the thoughts, the emotions, the situations, and the behavior, it kind of is like, okay, now I see these things are separate and they influence each other, but they're not the same. So just because I feel overwhelmed does not actually mean there's no way out of the situation. It means I feel overwhelmed. So yes, you identify the thinking traps you might be falling into. And then, so there's a lot of things you can do to confront these thinking traps. The first would be to examine the evidence. So my thoughts are telling me I'm never going to be successful again. Well, what's the evidence that I'll never be successful just because I didn't get into this one program? There's not much evidence for it. Sure, there are some people who, having an MFA from an Ivy League helps them a lot. There's also a lot of people who don't have an MFA and are very successful. You don't need it. Double standard. So would I judge other people if they did the same, if the same thing happened to them? So if my friend didn't get into an MFA program, would I be telling her, you know what, you're dumb, you don't deserve anything good in life, and you're gonna fail? Like, hopefully you wouldn't. That's kind of toxic. Don't do that. So if you wouldn't, see when you're holding yourself to a double standard, when you might be talking to somebody, talking to yourself in a way that you wouldn't talk to other people. Then I like the survey method. So that's also to find out whether other people you trust, and people you trust is a key word. You don't want to be asking random people or people that you don't trust, do they agree with your thoughts? So if you were to, I think most people wouldn't even go through with asking a friend, because they know if they told their friend, hey, I think I'm a failure because I didn't get into this program. What do you think? They know their friend would probably say like, yeah, you're kind of wild, you're wilding out right now. That's not it. But I think it's really helpful to definitely share your thoughts with your friends, and it kind of puts things into perspective for you when you might be interpreting things in a detrimental way. And just in general, to kind of aim for a balance and aim to see things in a way with a lot more equanimity and also acceptance. So what I mean by that is, like in the moment, you might be feeling overwhelmed, and then you judge yourself on top of that for being overwhelmed. So I didn't get into this program. I feel really horrible about it. Oh, but why do you feel so horrible about it? You know everything will work out. You shouldn't even feel that way. So on top of already making ourselves feel bad, we're doing more to make ourselves feel bad. Cultivating a mindset of acceptance is really key here. So when a feeling or a thought comes up that feels maladaptive or not so good for us, to cultivate a mindset where you can tell yourself, you know, just notice, I'm feeling really anxious right now. Or my judgment, my self-judgment is really acting up a lot today. Or I woke up today on the wrong side of the bed. Whatever it is, to just notice it. And also remember, this is a passing state. Every mood, every feeling, every thought is a passing state. So we could just have acceptance for what exists in the moment and know that it will move on is very important to cultivate. So, okay, I'm going to go through some self-care checklists. And I just want to say that you don't got to do everything on this list. You only have to do the things that call to you. I know I work with a lot of people also who have like very perfectionistic tendencies. And so self-care is another thing on their checklist. I worked with this woman who was, she was both she had another career and she also was an artist. And like, so you can understand her life was like really quite busy because she's juggling a lot of things. And she's like, yeah, I don't understand why I'm anxious, because I did my yoga in the morning and I organized all of my clothes for the next day and I made my green smoothie and I journaled and I did my tarot cards and I went to therapy, and I was like, oh my God, like you're making self-care like another thing on your to-do list to stress yourself about. That's literally like the opposite of what it's supposed to be. So like if self-care is stressing you out, like you're not doing it right. You're really not. You need to be very compassionate for yourself and be able to like care for yourself in ways that actually feel caring and that actually are possible for you. And don't use self-care as a way to like further make yourself feel bad. Like, oh, I haven't had a spa day in a few months. Like, I'm not taking care of myself. Like, it's okay. It's really okay. It's fine. It's fine if you're a grown woman and you know, sometimes like have to have Taco Bell for dinner at 10 p.m. Like, it's fine. It's really okay. All right. So in physical self-care, anything involving movement is important to have. So that could be exercise, but for some people that means dancing around your room for 20 minutes to some of your favorite songs. That qualifies as movement, especially if you're having fun. That's really good. Sleep is number one thing. As a psychologist, I do need to tell you that the best sleep you can get, the most restful sleep, will be if you fall asleep between 11 and 12 at night and you wake up after 7 to 8 hours. I think most people here are within the like maybe 20 years old to 50 something bracket. So that applies to you. Teenagers actually need less sleep, and really old people need less sleep. So that's why I'm saying it's different. Really old people, yikes. Okay, people who are like 70 and up need less sleep. But I'm realizing I'm also talking to a group of artists, and some of y'all really love to sleep at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. and I have unconditional acceptance and loving regard for that. But I'm just letting you know it will affect you over time, because unfortunately you are a human being with a circadian rhythm and hormone cycles. And so just try to, whenever you can, sleep between 11 and 12. But no one's watching you except, I don't know if you believe in the Sandman or the Tooth Fairy is watching you, making sure you're sleeping. Okay, I'm going like insane now. All right, so take time off when you're sick, I think, is a really big one that could be difficult for people, but it is part of your physical self-care. And also making time for a vacation, a little trip. So not all of us, make six figures and can go on like two week trips every year. And that's not what I'm telling you. But, if you're living in New York City and, you can afford a Metro North trip to ticket to Tarrytown, and you can go on a nice little walk in nature with your friends, that's great. You should do that. That's a day trip. And that's really going to help your mental health. Psychological self-care includes anything that gives you time for self-reflection. Not all of us have access to therapy, and I really understand that, but anything that helps you take some time to reflect on yourself is ultimately going to be a good thing. So you can look up journaling activities. There are usually group therapy is really cheap or free. So if you look for that in the community, it should be something that will definitely, I love group therapy. It's people hate it because they're afraid of being in a group, but it can sometimes be so much more beneficial than individual therapy. Um, Anything that allows you to engage yourself at different aspects of yourself that you don't usually show the world. So, you know, like as much as I'm a psychologist full time, it's not really as psychologically beneficial for me to be like, oh, I'm gonna go take a vacation by going on a psychology conference in Spain. Like it's in Spain, but like I'm still basically working. So for artists, it's a little different because as much as you love music, like you're not necessarily attending a concert in the same way that a non-artist is, because you're listening to the music and maybe analyzing it and comparing yourself, or like, your brain is engaging with it in a different way. So it doesn't mean you stop going to concerts, but it means you find other aspects of yourself to explore. So you might discover you love pottery, you love going to museums, and you actually make time and go. You love playing volleyball. Like, so you should find ways to show other parts of yourself to other people, and to engage with all those different parts of yourself. In terms of emotional self-care, the first one, spending time with others whose company you enjoy. It seems very straightforward and obvious, but you will not believe how many people do not do this. They spend most of their time with people they do not enjoy. Yeah, it's wild. It makes no sense, but here we are out here, just spending a lot of time with people who don't seem to understand us or have any interest in knowing us at a deeper level. And that does have an effect on you. So identify who those people are in your life and make time for them. And if you don't have those kind of people in your life, prioritize it. It's time to make some friends. It's time to make some deep connections. Or if you block those people out, maybe understand why. Why is intimacy difficult for me, and why do I not want to sit with another person and be seen? Is there something about myself I don't want to acknowledge, but then I'm avoiding? Yes, reread your favorite books, review your favorite movies. I think that's a really great one, because a lot of people feel bad for rewatching their comfort shows on Netflix or something, but it's actually pretty good for your emotional well-being. I call it comfort movie or a comfort book. It's actually legitimately that. It allows us to there's this psychologist you might have heard of, Carl Jung, who says that a lot of the reasons we're drawn to certain stories are because they help us replay parts of our life that we are looking for mastery over, or we're looking for more validation over. So he's pretty interesting. He says, with there's a big relevance of your favorite fairy tale from childhood, and usually your life will reflect a lot of what that favorite fairy tale was. It's pretty interesting. A lot of us don't remember what the favorite fairy tale was, but now that I've introduced the idea to you, it might come to you. You might remember in a few days, or it might come to you in a dream. Actually revisiting stories that feel familiar to us, it's pretty good for your mental health. Allow yourself to cry, and also allow yourself to laugh. And then, of course, finding a space for your anger as well. So sometimes finding a space for your anger means physical activity, letting out aggression through physical activity. But a lot of the time you can let your aggression out through social change. So writing letters to your local congressperson, tax the rich, etc., tax the 1%, all that kind of stuff. Protests. And yes, spending time with children is also good for your emotional well-being. So find some kids. I don't know. And then, of course, your spiritual self-care. So not all of us, this doesn't mean religion. So not all of us, follow religion, and that's fine. But what is meant by spirituality is a feeling of connection that you have to humanity and to other people around you, and being in touch with your ability to have compassion. So it's something that connects you to who you are beyond your roles in this world, beyond the jobs that you do, beyond the fact that you're a mother, a sister, friend. There's something you are beyond all of that. And whatever gets you in touch with it, and what grounds you on a really deep level, that's considered spirituality, spiritual self-care. So spending time with nature is usually that for a lot of people. Anything that inspires you, so making time to be inspired. For some people, that means, going to a museum and just looking at works of art that feel inspiring. For other people, that means, spending time with people who you admire and who you can really look up to. It also, spiritual self-care has to do with cultivating different ways to look at your life and the things that happen to you. So remembering that you don't always have to be in charge or be the expert. In Zen Buddhism, this is called cultivating the beginner's mind. So when we're a beginner and we've never done something before, we're curious, we're open to inspiration, and we're open to learning. We know that we don't know everything yet, and that's okay. So cultivating a beginner's mind in everything that we do, even if we're not a beginner anymore. Having experiences that bring you awe, contributing to causes that you believe. So all of these things are important for your spiritual self-care. But some people, what's interesting about spiritual self-care is, I mentioned it doesn't necessarily have to be connected to religion, but a lot of the times it can, even if you don't believe in that religion anymore. So if you grew up Catholic, even if you don't necessarily connect to Catholicism anymore, if you grew up going to church and hearing people sing certain hymns, or, hearing the homily and things like that, are something that brought you peace when you were younger, going to church can be something that still brings you a certain level of spiritual self-care, even if you don't believe in it. Being in that environment that once brought you comfort and that you have this emotional connection to is fine. I mean, I don't know about your theological and personal beliefs about these things. Like, not everyone believes you should go to church if you don't believe in it, and that's fine. But I'm just trying to say that even if you necessarily don't pray anymore, listening to someone pray, if it once brought you comfort, can still bring you comfort. And so lastly, I know a lot of you, it's for students. So yes, a lot of you here are students, and, having a level of academic self-care, but I also think this applies to people who are in a career full-time as well. Making sure you have time for breaks. There's something called the Pomodoro Method, which a lot of psychologists mention to people who have executive functioning difficulties or difficulties with time management, which is you only work in 20-minute blocks. And then you have a 10-minute mandatory break where you can't even look at your work. And then so 20 minutes, 10 minutes, and after 3 of those, then you might take a 15 or half an hour break. So, taking breaks is actually going to make you absorb the material better. Finding a way to allocate a specific space for your work and only doing work there. So a lot of us, because of the pandemic, we've been stuck at home, and I understand this might not be feasible, but the recommendation is to only use your bed for sleeping and sex, and that's it. So don't be eating in your bed. Don't do work in your bed. Don't do anything else. For some of us, it's hard, right? We don't have the space for it. But as much as you can, to the extent that you can do it, it's really good to keep segmented spaces where it's only, it basically psychologically primes you that when I sit in this place, it is for work. And when I sit in this place, it is for sleep. And I really love this suggestion to get regular support from peers and mentors. So it's very important in your community or in your social circle to have people that you can look at and think, that's someone I want to be like in 4 years and 5 years and 10 years and 20 years. That's the kind of life I want. And you don't have to talk to them all the time. You don't even have to be in regular contact with them at all. But to be able to have people that represent something that you want to be is very important for you to have in your circle, because it kind of reminds you that it's possible. So, sure, there's a certain level of this we get from celebrities that we see online or you follow on Twitter, but a lot of those people we can't really identify with. Most of us, I'm guessing here, are not hyper wealthy and don't come from super privileged backgrounds. Not all of us do. So when we see the celebrities, we kind of still feel like it's inaccessible. Yes, we want what they have, but you can't quite relate. So when you know people who you can relate to, there's something about them that you share an identity or a few identities. They feel like a real person to you, and they have something that you wish you had or you're aspiring to be like. It's much more expansive for you, and it's more likely to help you kind of reach your goals. And then, of course, balance is the last thing. So of everything I've mentioned here, remember, you don't have to do everything on this list. I can share this presentation also afterward if people want the list to look at, but reflect on the things that stand out to you the most, but you don't have to do everything. And a balance in everything is really key here. So there's a few issues that I know there's a lot of issues I didn't cover, but I wanted to give time right now for anyone who has any specific thing they have a question about. It could be a concern that they personally have, that a friend has, or a general issue they just want to learn more about in mental health. And this is a time for you to send it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask.
Really quickly, I just want to say thank you so much. This has already been really helpful. But for anybody who might be worried about the recording, I want you to know that we can absolutely remove any personal questions you might ask from this recording. So don't be worried about that.
Thank you, Carrie.
I would love to ask a question. For those of us who are operating in spaces where we are in a minority, whether that is a woman, a queer person, a person of color, anything at all, it often feels like even now when there's so much discourse around treating everybody with dignity and respect and as equals, especially in the workplace, coming from a musical theater background, especially getting back into rehearsal rooms for the first time in 18, 19 months, it can really feel quite exhausting to hear everybody's opinions on all of the discourse that has happened over the last 18 months and asking for your opinion and advice and guidance and being put in the role of educator again when you are simply trying to exist and be yourself and be an artist. So I would love to hear your thoughts and any advice that you have about, I am now a new producer, so I'm in a lot of rooms where I am the person who's in charge and in a position of authority. So it has been difficult to both occupy that space and then also kind of continually being asked to be a de facto educator and a person who will often one of the only South Asian people in the, not even people of color anymore, which is great, but still being the only South Asian face in the room.
Yeah, this is such a good question. And it's so interesting because I've become, my job here is also coordinator of social justice and diversity initiatives, which means I'm kind of the go-to person for all mental health and social justice related issues. So I've literally put myself into a position where I am the go-to for everything, which everyone tries to avoid, right? So I think that's also a reminder that we can feel a lot of pressure to be everything that these people kind of want from us, right? To be the one who knows everything on these issues. And sometimes it's better left to experts, and it's okay. So we feel this kind of pressure to be that thing, and also know that just because someone's asking you a question doesn't mean you have to have the answer for it. And it's really okay to divert to something else. I'm so happy that you're asking about, what you can do for Afghan refugees or what is happening in Afghanistan. I really think it would be helpful for you to look up some resources that are written by Afghan people, because I'm not Afghan myself. If you happen to know any, you can refer them. If you don't know any, that's okay. You don't have to be also the person who knows where all the resources are located. And to be able to tell somebody, I don't know, is okay. We really don't need to always have all the answers. And on the other hand, I think there is a tiered approach to how we answer these questions as well, because there are some people who you don't know them, they're a stranger, or they're an acquaintance. And when someone like that comes up to you and asks you a question that even might have emotionally triggering content, as a South Asian person, it must be so hard. Can you tell me about your experience? You don't got to tell them. It's okay in those instances to know that just because someone's asking me a question, I don't have to answer it. I can say, this is something really personal to me, and thank you for being curious. There are so many documentaries out there about it. If you know of one, you can recommend it, but you don't have to. Or you go on, Dr. Samosa's account, some content. Then the second tier of people who are you know, they're somewhat important in your life, but not emotionally close. So this could be a supervisor. This could be someone who's like close on your working team, but not necessarily a friend. And this could be someone who you share content with, or you share an answer with because you care enough that they should know about it, but you don't have to go in deep. So for this person, you might say something like, yes, you know, a lot of South Asian people, they're typecast into certain roles, and these might be the roles that they're typecast in. And in other ways, you know, these are the ways that they deal with it. You give like a short, concise, clear answer if you can, and that's it. And you don't have to go past that. And if you want to learn more, look into, you know, tweets by Padma Lakshmi. She always writes about this stuff. And the third tier people would be your close people who really mean something to you, you know, intimate, close connections. They could be someone you've met, you know, at a show, but you really care about them, right? And in that instance, I would say you might feel the need and a genuine desire to go deeper with them and tell them, listen, you know, this is what happened to me when I was in high school. I tried out for the play and I never got a lead role because I'm brown, and they can't have a brown Mary Poppins. And, you know, this is how it is for a lot of people, and, you know, whatever it is. So like, just know that for different people, there are different approaches, and the level of emotionality you put into it, it changes depending on who's asking.
Thank you so much.
Okay, yes, thanks.
I had a question to ask. So for context, I'm currently a senior in an undergraduate program for music direction, and the program I'm in is pretty new, and there's some students that are younger than me, primarily male, and there's one woman in there, but the program is also all men professors. And I was wondering if you had any advice of not only just like being, you know, a woman in a career and just like in an environment that is primarily male dominated, but then also an environment that can kind of become a bit of a toxic work environment, especially as we're working on a production of Into the Woods right now. And it definitely is a tense room and not always the most, like, I guess, safe room, if that makes sense, just because of how things work. And I was wondering if it's a matter of just like having those coping skills outside of the room, or if it's worth it to try to make a difference in the room, even if it has any sort of repercussions, especially being a student and being a woman. But yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of things it's a lot of things I tell students, and it doesn't always feel good to say, but I'm gonna say it. Sometimes you just got to get your degree and be out. And I think your focus is to get what you can out of the experience, and then once you graduate, you can do whatever you want. So that is one part of it. The other side of it is that when genuine injustices are occurring and you feel the need to speak up, you should do that. So with every situation, there is a balance to be had. I really faced this a lot in grad school. You know, I can totally relate to the things you're saying. There were times when a professor or a lot of students in my class who came from a very different background than me would say really messed up and ignorant things, or treat me in a way that was very unfair. Some of those times I spoke up and I was like, you know, I'm not putting up with this. I don't deserve this treatment. And I maybe brought it even to the department chair, because change needed to I said change needed to happen for this specific thing. And then I learned at a certain point, I don't always have to be the one to make that change. And there are going to be some situations where it's very uncomfortable for me. And the best way for me to cope with this is to just get through. And outside, I have my lovely group of friends and family that I can complain to and vent to them, and maybe say, you know what, this is a change that I'm going to work on once I graduate, because life is long. So, you know, I thought it was very unfair at some point that they had some of us, like we had to do these kind of mandatory internships, this is fine, but some of us had to do them in places that were very far away. And like one of my classmates, you had to spend $200 a week on transportation, which he couldn't afford as like a grad student. But if he didn't do it, he would lose his internship, and there was no financial support. So that was something, I think he chose to speak up about it. I just had too much on my plate and I was like, I can't necessarily take this on in the same way you are. But now as, a professional, that's something that I'm lobbying for change for in my profession. If anyone I can influence now as a professional psychologist, I'm telling them, you need to pay your interns, you need to pay your students, you need to have a transportation fund. It's not right that some people are kept from these experiences. So just keep in mind that whatever feels right for you in the moment, don't feel guilty about it, because not every fight is your fight right now, but life is long.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah. Thanks.
I'm just curious, for students specifically re-entering the physical space of school in a pandemic, during a pandemic, do you have any recommendations for people who might feel overwhelmed by being around people again, about ways that they can find balance in their life in this very strange time?
So do you mean overwhelmed by like social anxiety?
I think social anxiety and also health concerns as well. Yeah, and concerns for, I know a lot of teachers that I had are more at risk, and I worried about getting them sick. I worried about me getting sick, but also just, yeah, sometimes I just haven't been around this many people in years.
Yeah.
That's so strange. And noticing that with a lot of people in social gatherings is people have like forgotten that years have passed.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. So I think when it comes to anything in terms of health concern, so that could mean that you have a chronic illness, or it can mean that you're just, you're worried about getting sick, which is a health concern. You have a right in any sort of educational setting to request accommodations. So if you are a university student, your school does have something called the Office of Disability Services, or might have a different name, but usually it's called that, or ODS. And if you have any concerns related to your health, chronic illness, disability, you should go to your ODS office and talk to them about what accommodations are possible. So what that could look like is you get a special accommodation to take a course, hybrid, so partially online, or in smaller groups, or there's certain accommodations that could be made for you to make you more comfortable in the classroom. So that's when it comes to like health concerns, I would say definitely pursue that route, and don't be afraid to speak to professors about it, because professors are humans too, and they have concerns as well. And like, they don't want you to feel inhibited in the classroom. So whatever allows you to participate to your fullest, communicate with your professor. And even if you don't know what the solution is, they will help you find a way. They want to help you. Generally, I think they want to help you, or at least other admin in your school want to help you. When it comes to social anxiety, yeah, it's a really real pressure that we return to, life of seeing other humans in physical reality. And what can come with that is this pressure that I got to talk to everyone, or now I'm back at school, I have to make friends. And real life doesn't work like that. In real life, we are attracted to speaking to certain people who we vibe with, to put it in, the only way I could think of. You don't have to be friends with everyone. And they're going to feel that pressure of, okay, I'm back in a classroom and I got to make friends with, I have to have my classmates. I got to have friends. You really don't. You need to have a social circle, but you don't need to be friends with everyone. So if you're finding that maybe because of your major or your school or something you're in, it's hard for you to make friends because you're not finding people who are on the same page as you, that happens. It's okay. But seek those people out. So be easy on yourself. You're not going to make friends in all of your classes, and it's okay. But sometimes those people will come from outside of your program. Like my best friends that I had when I was doing my master's in psychology, but my best friends were people I met when I was taking my Sanskrit classes and my Hindi and Urdu literature classes. So completely like outside of the field, but they're like my best friends forever now. So, that's a great thing about being in a larger institution, is there's so many different types of people, and just know that you don't got to vibe with all of them, but you'll find someone.
Thank you. It is 7:01, so I don't want to keep anyone here past. Does anyone have any more questions? I also don't want to cut anyone off.
And also, I just want to let anyone know if there's something private or you just think of a question later, my contact info is there. So feel free to email me or just DM me on Instagram.
Great.
Even if you're watching this after, I want to let people watching the recording know you can also contact me.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Persaud. This has been so helpful. And I'm very excited to share this with everyone.
Thank you all.
And hopefully we'll get to have you back in the future to speak with more student maestros and maybe the last one. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Bebu, for thinking of me. But yes, I also, as I said, I'm an artist and I love speaking to other artists. So this is rewarding for me too. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye.